Hello, my name is Caden Brett, and I'm working with Kent Van Buren. We will be writing or doing a project on September 1st, 1939. The poem is about the start of World War II, which is a fateful day in history when Hitler and Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The rise of the fascist Nazi regime in this poem is focused on. Throughout the poem, we see Auden's reaction to this movement. Although this is Auden's poem, he later ends up hating it. He said that the arguments made in it were too high-flown, and he said that he regretted ever writing in the poem. He also had excluded this poem from his list of features of works. I personally cannot understand why, as I find this poem to have some great commentary on just fascism and the Nazis, but also fateful day in history. I am not the only one to believe this either. On September 11, 2001, this poem was published in the entirety of the front page of New York magazines.
So, for some context, this poem is about the start of World War II, referenced by the title, September 1st, 1939. Of course, that day being the fateful day in history when Nazi Germany and Hitler invaded Poland, sparking the start of the Second World War. This poem is focused on the rise of the fascist Nazi regime. Throughout the poem, we can see Auden, our speaker and author of the poem, his reactions to the rise of the Nazi regime. Although this is Auden's poem, he ended up later on saying that hating it and saying that he regretted ever writing it. He said that the arguments made were on, and I quote, too high flown. He also ended up excluding this poem from the list of his featured works, which is a pretty big deal. But personally, I can't understand why he did this, as I think this poem is a great commentary on but also like fateful days in history. And when I say fateful days in history, I mean like days that no one will forget. As an example, like on September 11, 2001, the day when the Twin Towers were attacked, of course, this exact poem was published in a lot of New York newspapers on the front page, just word for word. But it's not just fascism and fateful days in history. I think the most important thing this poem comments on is modern day and previous day imperialism. Now on to the speaker of this poem. The speaker of this poem is Auden himself, as I previously said. Although the poem wasn't actually written in a bar on 52nd Street, as he says in the first stanza, he was in fact living in New York when he wrote this poem. So like I said, at the time, of course, he would be an American through and through. He had been there since he moved to Birmingham in 1908, a year after his birth in 1907. And what this leads to is a perspective that can change the entire scope. When I say that, I mean like because he's an American, the way that he's going to look at the start of this world war is going to be a lot different than if he was in a country in Europe. What it does is it creates a tone of something that a little less urgency, a little less urgent, a little less frantic than you would imagine it to be if it was a European country, because there's no real, at this time, of course there's that worry, but there's no real tangible, clear, like, danger for him yet. Of course there's the worry of, well, what's going to happen with this fascist regime, but there's nothing that's had an impact on him quite yet. Now that doesn't mean that this poem doesn't care, that it comes off as uncaring. Of course he still cares. It's just the way that it comes off as is a little less urgent, a little more nonchalant. Moving on to the literal details of the poem. The first stanza begins by letting the reader know where the speaker is, of course, the bar in New York on 52nd Street. The speaker says that he is, quote unquote, uncertain and afraid of the implications of Germany's invasion of Poland. The first stanza ends with the speaker saying that an aroma of death hangs in the air, referencing all the death that would soon follow as a result of the events of September 1st, 1939. Then we move on to the second stanza. The second stanza starts with the speaker implicating Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation as a reason for the current state of Germany and Europe. Immediately after this, the speaker says, "Find what occurred at Linz." Linz, of course, being the birthplace of Hitler. What I think this is the speaker trying to give some commentary on how oftentimes a monster that is as evil as Hitler or any person that has that type of evil exists. Historians and people in general will always try and find an explanation or a reason for why they are the way they are. And I think that this is him kind of saying that that's kind of pointless or unnecessary. And this goes on. He continues to give his opinion on it, on why Hitler was the way he was. He says, quote unquote, "Those to whom evil is done do evil in return." Of course, this is him giving some commentary on human behavior, basically saying what goes around comes around, if you wanted to simplify it. But I don't think that it's something we should simplify. I think that it's a little more deep.
Now I'll be talking about all the poetic details in the poem. The date was repeated in the poem multiple times to help give the date meaning and power. This is important because this is what the poem is about. The tone carried throughout the poem was a retrospective tone. It's kind of like his hindsight was 20/20 on the whole situation. The theme of the poem was, we must love each other or die. There was multiple symbols used in the poem, as for example, the towers, which were used to represent power and authority, and light and darkness to represent hope. Another literary device used by the speaker is the use of allusion. The speaker alludes to Martin Luther, the leader of the Protestant Reformation, Linz, the birthplace of Hitler, and Thucydides, an ancient Greek general. These allusions are used by the speaker to make commentary of the causes of the Nazi regime, the reason Hitler was so evil, and the evil of the government as a whole.
Now on to the last section of the project, the themes. So I'll start with a possible theme statement. A possible theme statement for this text could be that regardless of how advanced or privileged a country and government is, at the end of the day, governments all want power and control, and that these governments will commit any evil to this gain. Although Hitler's regime was of a different ideology and a different type of government than that of the United States, at the end of the day, both countries committed atrocities in the name of imperialism. Now, of course, we all know what Hitler did with the concentration camps, but the reason why it was all done in part had to do with anti-Semitism and racism. But of course, at the end of the day, it was for power and control and imperialism. In the same sense that in the same exact World War, the United States dropped the atomic bombs in Japan, killing hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people, all in the name of keeping their power, all in the name of imperialism, all as a result of imperialism. Another theme of this poem is one that was slightly touched on earlier, this theme being one of the natural balances of the world. So the author said that if evil is done to a person, that person will do evil. So if evil is done to a person, that person will inevitably do evil to another, in the same sense that if good is done to a person, that person will do good. And it is this balance that keeps the world in check. I think that this author thinks, or this author and poem conveys a theme of for all good there is evil, for all evil there is good, kind of like a yin-yang effect. Those are the themes of the poem, and that's our project. Thank you, Mr. Hill. Give us an A.